Welcome to Life and Faith from the Centre for Public Christianity. I'm Justine Toh.
And I'm Simon Smart.
Well, he was the hero whose story captivated the world. A survivor of testicular cancer, winner of the Tour de France an astonishing 7 times. He also started the Livestrong Cancer Foundation that's raised over $300 million, dedicated to research against cancer and also empowering people with the disease. But in 2012, Lance Armstrong was revealed as a drug cheat. And this revelation was all the more shocking given his repeated and emphatic denials that he ever took drugs at all. Now, Lance Armstrong's spectacular fall from grace has been recounted in the documentary by Alex Gibney, The Armstrong Lie.
I like to win, but more than anything, I can't stand the idea of losing because to me that equals death.
In 2009, I set out to make a film about Lance Armstrong's comeback year.
Lance, how you feeling? Nervous, but that's good.
I wasn't naive about past doping allegations,
Never tested positive.
They think he has.
He didn't.
but I couldn't help but root for the old pro.
If I win again, they can't say that. They cannot. Well, you can, but...
He had lied to me, straight to my face, all throughout 2009.
UCI will ban Lance Armstrong from cycling.
When the truth came out, I told him he owed me an explanation.
After the years and years of just the most amazing denials, and emphatically say, I'm not on drugs.
He agreed to sit down one more time.
The film's released in select cinemas in Sydney and Melbourne this week, and Simon, you got the chance to go see it.
I did. It was a good experience. I was sort of interested in this story anyway. It's been in the news, a lot of the time. I've got friends whose heroes Lance Armstrong, or was. So it's, it sort of was interesting to me anyway to go along. But I have to say, you wouldn't have to be interested in the sport of cycling or even sport at all to be captivated by this story.
Yeah, there's a real sense that all of us, want to believe the fiction. And, I mean, he's got such a great story to begin with. You'd want him to just simply go from triumph to triumph rather than, fall from grace. And one thing that I suppose comes up in the documentary is this idea that he couldn't do it alone, right? There was obviously a team of people around him that would enable this, this drug taking to happen. So what's going on here? Is it just his lie, or is it the lie of many people?
No, there's plenty of people lying in this film, and it's almost Shakespearean in the way it comes across. You have got this kind of great hero who is just lauded and loved all over the world, and yet he kind of hides this dark secret. And by now, as you watch the film, you know what that is. And there are shady characters. There's this doctor called Michel Ferrari. He's an Italian doctor, and he's sort of lurking around at various points. And he's got this they interview him lots of times, and he's got this glint in his eye. It's almost like we all know what's going on here as he makes these denials. But it turns out that he was part of a very, very elaborate program of not only drug taking, but then the ways of avoiding being caught, which included things like blood transfusions. So the athletes on the team that Armstrong was part of would have blood taken out of them in a full blood transfusions, and then during the competition. So it's always a bit hard to put these things together, but at the crucial time they would have that blood put back in so they'd avoid detection. Also, Armstrong was very good friends with someone who was high up in one of the drug the testing agencies. He made a donation to the drug testing agency of $100,000 once.
Dodgy.
There's a slight conflict of interest there. Yeah. And he described how the drug testers would come to them at various points and say, listen, you're getting close, this is looking a bit dangerous, you need to change your behaviour. So yeah, you're right, it was lots of people involved. The whole team was involved. These were young guys. What's interesting is that they were a team of guys who were trying to compete in this European cycling and were finding themselves just unable to compete. And the reason is, it's pretty clear now that everyone who was doing well was on drugs. So they had to say, right, guys, what do we do here? Do we jump in and get on board with this, or do we go and find another thing to do? There was no way, they said, that you could compete at the highest level without it.
That's pretty extraordinary, because it sounds as though Alex Gibney really wanted to believe the story like the rest of us, and yet all of these guys are all in on it as well. Now, let's talk about Alex, okay? So he wanted to believe the story of Armstrong the legend, right, rather than Armstrong the liar. And, he obviously knows, given that the film's called The Armstrong Lie, that he's been betrayed or he feels betrayed. Do you get a sense of how that betrayal works its way into the film?
He set out to do a documentary on Armstrong's comeback year in 2009. So he had cancer in the 90s, which you talked about earlier. It was terrible cancer. He was very close to death, had brain surgery, heaps of chemotherapy, was terribly sick. He makes this recovery from that and then goes on to win the Tour de France, the most grueling cycling event in the world, in 1999. And then, of course, it goes on to win 7 of these things. It is an amazing story, even if you did take drugs. It's a feat of athletic kind of, and sort of the recovery from cancer thrown into that is quite astonishing. Then he had 4 years off and then was going to have this comeback year. There's this sense that if he hadn't done that, he probably would have got away with it because there was a lot of investigation after that. And so Gibney sits down with him and does this very intimate documentary. And the idea is that it'll be this triumphant return. He doesn't win, he becomes third, which is still amazing enough. And Gibney says, at a key point of the documentary, he says, I include myself in a whole lot of others who wanted to believe the beautiful lie rather than the ugly truth. And so when the ugly truth did come out, Gibney's story's ruined. And he goes to Lance Armstrong, who had, to him and many, many others, had flat out denied this for years and years. He says to him, mate, you owe me an explanation. And the sort of, I think Armstrong feels that he does owe him. And so he sits down and does this quite candid interview. Now that is sort of dropped in at various points along the way. So you know when you're talking to the Lance Armstrong, the fallen king, as well as the times you're talking to him as the heroic comeback kid, that sort of stuff. So all the way along, you get this sense that Gibney's pretty wounded. He feels betrayed, as so many did.
And if the film's constructed like that, I guess you're seeing in very close proximity to each other, Armstrong finally telling the truth, but that juxtaposed with him completely lying at the same time.
And it's quite shocking, actually, because you see him look you in the eye and so sincerely and quite elaborately could tell you these stories around why he would never have taken drugs. And the weird thing is, you almost want to believe him. He's this kind of really magnetic character.
Getting sucked
and
into
he
it,
seems
Simon.
like such a good guy. And the weirdest part for me was, even with the knowledge of what we now know, you're sort of there going, this is really convincing, like even at that point. So, before that, of course, he was very, very convincing. To the point, though, where he ruined people's lives who were questioning him. There were 2 people in particular, married couple, who were brought before a court to say something about Armstrong's drug taking, and he really, it was character assassination on his part to the point where they were kind of rejected by a lot of others. So he was happy to ruin people's lives. Journalists, he would just attack if they would question him. And so that part of it's pretty nasty. You see a side of him that's very unpleasant.
I certainly was very confident that I would never be caught.
The gift that he has is his gift as a storyteller.
A cancer survivor overcoming the disease comes back and wins. Yeah, they liked that.
Even in 1999, steroids showed up in a urine test.
So the guys scoured the internet, and we found one that was indeed a cream.
Cream for what we call a saddle sore.
Such a huge number of people wanted to believe that they hated anyone who didn't believe.
I mean, I'm all for a clean game, but this is ridiculous.
He was an immensely intimidating person.
You are not worth the chair that you're sitting on.
If you crossed him, you were doomed. There are people who have really been ruined.
Lance wanted to humiliate Frankie, and he wanted to get back at me.
From that point on, I was shunned, banned from everybody, and a lot of people, wouldn't look at me, shake my hand.
That celebrity is what gave him such immense power.
Simply you don't recall, just how many times do I have to say it?
This is not a story about doping, it's a story about power, and the story became hanging on to that power.
Let's get to the real nature and the real detail of the story. We haven't heard it yet, is the truth.
Given that we see the depth of his denial and his lying, and yet also the way that his lies ruined the lives of people around him, do you get a sense that he's sorry at all for what he's done?
The interesting part of this is you get a sense that he's sorry he was caught. he doesn't really, it's not a repentant person. And even at the very end, Gibney gets this sense that, because he doesn't admit to doping in 2009 in his comeback year. And Gibney says, I can't believe that anymore. That just seems too hard to believe, especially given some of the pretty amazing feats he achieved in that comeback race. So he's able to say to himself, I think, that, look, there was all this good stuff that came out of us lying. Lots of people made money. It wasn't just us, like the companies that were sponsoring him, Trek bicycles, sold millions of bikes. He says we're all in on it and we all made a lot of money. Also, and there's an element of truth to this, he was able, the Live Strong Cancer thing is amazing. He was, I think, a sincere visitor to hospitals with kids with cancer, and I think he really did give people hope. People with cancer were sort of thinking, maybe I'll not just recover, but I'll be better than I was before, which is what Armstrong appeared to be. So I think all those sorts of things meant for him, he could justify his behaviour.
Simon, you started talking about how big the kind of lie became, and I suppose he's just digging his grave ever deeper with each lie that he tells.
Yeah, you get the feeling that after the first lie and after the first victory and the first kind of big feature article appears, that every subsequent lie becomes not only easier but necessary. And so he and others have to sort of construct this story. It's a myth around his performance, which turns out to be only able to do this because he was on things like EPO and testosterone and a whole lot of other things that are illegal, and who knows what they do to your body as well. Strange for someone who's only just survived cancer to risk his life in that way. But yeah, the lying becomes, in a way, it's like a trap. So once you've told the first lie, you're sort of entering into this prison in which there's too much to lose and too much at stake if you were to ever admit it and sort of pull out. Now within that prison, these guys lived famously wealthy, spectacular lives, rock stars and so on, especially Armstrong. But the party went on for a while, but you do get the feeling all the way through this film that the disaster, the fall is inevitable and it's coming, and when it came, it was a huge fall.
But from what you've said, he doesn't seem to quite get that, or he still wants to believe the story himself. So when the film ends, without giving too much away, is there any hope for him? Is he beyond redemption?
Oh, you wouldn't say that, but he's not there yet. You feel like he's a bit of a lonely figure. He deliberately, there's shots of him, whether he is or not, the depiction of him is that. There's a shot of him riding by himself on a mountain bike in the hills, and he's banned from every type of competition. He's lost all his sponsorships. He's up for hundreds of millions of dollars in lawsuits. And it's been a big fall. He doesn't yet seem to have come to terms with that. Who knows? Over time he may, but there's you get the feeling there's some self-reflection still required.
And as one wise person once said, the truth will set you free. And that certainly seems applicable given Armstrong's prison of lies that he's constructed for himself.
Yeah, it does. I mean, when Jesus said that, of course, he was mostly referring to himself as the truth and what it would mean to follow him. But I think it's broadly applicable to this story. And a really important part of the film was the fact that despite what Armstrong could justify and despite perhaps some of the good outcomes of this lie, there's no doubt about what the filmmakers think, Alex Gibney and others who comment in the film, that none of those good things make this lie okay. There's this sense that, okay, we did all this stuff, but there's something more valuable in the authentic life. And, whether it means you don't make it to the top, or that there's a cost involved in that, but there's something deeply valuable and worth pursuing. And you feel like Armstrong's lost that, and that's a big loss.
It sounds like a fascinating film, Simon, with a lot to say about human nature, the kind of lies that we want to believe about ourselves, and also the lies we want to believe about other people, the beautiful lie rather than the ugly truth. The film is The Armstrong Lie, and it's in select cinemas in Sydney and Melbourne.